Welcome back, players. I'm Jack with 3-6 Cancel, and this is Coco the Weiss Cat. Before we get into this deck tech, and it's a pretty spicy one, there is one thing I want to address. I took a small break from creating content because I had some surgery on my mouth that prevented me from recording good audio for a while. But fear not, players, I'm fine now, and 3-6 Cancel is going to continue to produce quality content for English Weiss Schwarz. We have some really cool stuff in the works, so look forward to it as we move into the summer circuit of 2018. That out of the way, let's get into the deck tech. Today, players, we're looking at a legend from deep under the sea. In a world where 1,000-ton ships take the form of moe blob waifus who rip off Jesus, there comes a threat from the deep. The Kanmasu's peaceful life of eating rice and winning regionals was challenged by something that rose from the ocean floor. This was the Abyssal Fleet Kantai Collection Extra Booster. So, a few fun facts about this EB. First, it was delayed greatly from its original release date. A ton of people were anxious for this set to come out, but because of shipping issues and rumored licensing agreements between Bushiroad and Kadokawa, the release was delayed for several months. Remember, kids, Bushiroad has to sign its life away every time to be able to use the image of your waifu, so be eternally grateful. But anyway, the set was finally released, and it was pretty popular. Second, it's legal to play the EB with all other Kantai sets, but the extra booster is largely self-contained. There's not a ton of reason to combine the two sets since they don't share any traits, and some of the cards in the Abyssal Fleet actually have some abilities that harm Fleet Girls. And third, this extra booster is strictly blue and green. There aren't too many variations of the Abyssal's deck since there are only two colors, and the card pool is kind of small. So the one we're looking at here is generally what an Abyssal's deck will look like. There are some other climax combos in the set, but they're largely on commons and not very popular. And the level 3s in this deck are the only ones in the set. So anyway, let's take a look at this deck. And we're going to be changing things up a little bit with the ratings, so bear with me. Instead of rating 1 through 10, I've decided it's more appropriate to use the letter rankings. These letter rankings range from D to S, D being the lowest and S being the highest. They correlate with their number counterparts in loose ways, but they do identify with certain ranges. It gives me a little more flexibility, and I think it demonstrates the idea a little more clearly. So from now on, we'll be using those. Let's jump in. So this deck obviously is blue and green. The level 1, 2, and 3 game all have a healthy mix of both, so it's a true two-color deck. Each level in this deck is really dynamic in how it plays, so let's take a look. Starting with the level 0, we see that there's a wide variety. Let's start with the stars of the show, though. First up, we have this Ha-class destroyer. It's a 2500 level 0 that, so long as you have 6 or more cards in your hand, gets +1 level and +1000 power. Given that most cards like this need to be alone to work or have some sort of demerit to them, we can already see that the level 0 here is strong out of the gate. And the thing about Ha-class is that in this deck, it's pretty much always active. This thing will stick around. But now that we've looked at things that'll stick around, let's move on to things that make other things go away. Because Abyssals are really good at that. This is Class Submarine. It's a 2k level 0 with a simple ability. When it comes into play, if your opponent has one or less characters in the center stage, you can choose a cost 0 character and put it on the bottom of their deck. Again, this is cost 0, not level 0. Which means if they're alone, this submarine can get rid of things like Vernet, Aqua, and any level 0 in English. It cleans up runners, loners, and even level boost characters. Class solves your problem and wrecks level 0 advantage for your opponent, period. Something a little different now is this cute little Santa Hoppo. Christmas Northern Princess in the Deep Sea, which is a mouthful, is a shifting clock switcher. So she makes things go away by sending them to your opponent's clock. That's already a solid ability, but she's also got Shift, which isn't extremely common. It means that at the beginning of your main phase, if she's in your clock, you can switch her with any green card in your hand. So you can clock her, and if you don't see what you want, grab her back. The way this card gives you options for how to play out your turn is just awesome. But it's also not too common, so don't expect to see this in every deck. If you decide to build an Abyssal's deck after watching this, which I hope you do, don't feel like you're missing out without this card. After all, it is a promo box topper. Abyssals has plenty of amazing options that are pure value, like this one, Light Cruiser Ogre in the Deep Sea. Yeah, another mouthful. Bushi didn't make the best translation effort with this set if you can't tell. She's a 2500 level 0, and when she comes in, you mill the top card. If it's a climax, this card goes to your stock. So, you know, oh no, I might get a free stock. But more importantly, if she's frontal attacked, you can put her in the waiting room and put a level 1 ogre in the deep sea from your hand in her place. There's no cost to use the ability so long as you have the card in your hand. This is a level 0 that changes into a 5k base level 1 with boosts for no cost. Disgusting. Let's move on before I make myself sick. So the last thing you'll see in the front row for the level 0 for this deck is this knee class. It's a toolbox kind of thing that helps us transition into our other level 0 tools, which we will in a second. But first we need to say that when you play this card, you get to put a card from your opponent's waiting room into their stock, and put the bottom card of their stock into their waiting room. And when it attacks, you get to give something else plus 1000 power. Mainly, this card is in the deck to make waiting room change targets tougher to access, or put climaxes in your opponent's stock. It's not a large part of the deck, but it's handy to have around. So that's our front line, so we'll transition to the deck's technology now. Starting off, we have a Brainstormer. It gives your middle center character plus 500, and per its usefulness, it's a tap 1 search Brainstormer. This may not be the number 1 Brainstormer in English Weiss, but I would say it at least ranks in the top 5. But on the subject of number 1, I want to close out with a level 0 that I've been saving. I have strong feelings about this next card, so take my review of it with a grain of salt. But that said, I think this last part of the Abyssal's level 0 suite is the best level 0 currently in English Weiss. That's really subjective, of course, because different level 0s serve different purposes, but I can't help marvel at this card. I would at the very least call it the number 1 support level 0 in English. And it's WoE class aircraft carrier. WoE class gives one of your characters plus 1000 at the start of your climax phase, so that's pretty good. But it also has this act ability. Pay 1, clock yourself, and tap this card. Search your deck for a Fleet in the Deep Sea character, and put it into your hand. Simple as that. Pay 1 and clock yourself to add any character in your deck to your hand every turn it's out. What kind of card adds this much to your game plan? With only 3 front slots in Weiss, the difference of being able to add one thing that you need to your hand has a massive impact on your turn. Heck, you can even use it to level up on command, which for any deck is a pretty nifty tool, but hitting level 1 first in this deck is a little more than that, and as soon as we move on, we'll see just why. And speaking of moving on, it's about that time. There are no more level 0 cards in this deck. But so what? The cards that we went over are pretty much all diamonds. That's why I rate this level 0 game an S rank. The lineup has some of the best level 0 cards in English Weiss, hands down, even if you're arguing about who's number 1 or number 3, and its rank needs to reflect that. So that was a pretty strong introduction. You would think that it would be hard act to follow for the next portion of the deck tech, and you'd be right, but the level 1 game at least rises to the challenge. Starting off, we have one of the most iconic Abyssal Fleet cards, Northern Princess in the Deep Sea, which also goes by the alias Hoppo. She's a 1/0 4500 that has a climax combo based ability, so she has no static abilities of her own. Her climax combo, though, is what makes Hoppo the trademark Abyssal Fleet card. She combos with Sync, which, like its namesake, lets you pick a level 0 or lower character on your opponent's side of the field and put them right into the waiting room. In addition, after you do that, you also reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a level 0 character, you can add it to your hand. So just 2 of these with the climax combo can clear the back row of most opponents, which is the main reason Hoppo is here. And with the back row gone, the climax boosted Hoppo can reverse some tough opponents now that they're cut down to size. There's not much else to say about this little Abyssal. Her ability is pretty self-explanatory, and if you're a Kantai fan, super flavorful. So let's move on to the other half of the Light Cruiser Ogre in the Deep Sea level 0, her level 1 final mode version. A 105k that has an unconditional plus 500 boost for each other Abyssal Fleet character, so a 107k in most cases. Most level 1s with this ability start at 4500 and can't be changed into, so this Ogre is a cut above the rest. Her downside is that if she's reversed, you can't encore anything that turn. But since almost no cards in the Abyssal Fleet expansion have auto encore abilities, there is no need to feel uneasy about it. Aside from coming out really early, Light Cruiser Ogre Final Mode is one of the most efficient level 1 bodies in the game, with one of the least detrimental downsides. And now it comes the Akatsuki, because there's no way that Abyssal Fleet wouldn't have one. But instead of being level 0, This is a level 1 4500. As a 3-of, there's not much else to say about it other than it's an Akatsuki, which even at level 1 is never bad. So that's the bread and butter for this level 1, but there are still 2 other cards to go over. As a 2-of, this Midway Cruiser makes an appearance as the last frontliner. Her text box may make your eyes cross, so let's take this one step at a time. First, she has an act ability to give any character plus 1500 for the price of 1 stock. Second, she gets plus 500 for every level 0 you have. Third, so long as you have 3 or more other Abyssals, she gets plus 1000. And fourth, when she comes into play, you can look at the top 2 cards of your deck and put them back in that order. And finally, she has a change ability when she hits the yard. So yeah, if there was ever a card for tech inclusion, or a toolbox, this card would be it. Is there an ability this card doesn't have? Anyway, to avoid going into painstaking detail on why each of these abilities helps you out, let's just go over some quick bullets. First, her self-buffs and her buffing ability give your front line the beef it might need to reverse tougher opponents out there if you need to. And while just looking at the top 2 cards of your deck might not seem that great, it can provide you with a definite answer to a lot of very important questions. Like, should I brainstorm? Should I use Woe Class? Or will my Hoppo's ability miss? And on top of that, she changes at a low cost. All of these abilities make Midway Princess an annoying card to deal with, and a character that's never bad. And last but certainly not least, this level 1 lineup wouldn't be complete without a 102k splittable backup, the current Untitled level 1 backups that doesn't cost stock. So the Abyssal fleet doesn't compromise on the power of its backups. And that's our level 1 suite, 14 cards in total that have some nasty abilities. But that said, let's step back again. While these are all good cards, none of them are quite Zeka and Yuki or My Wallet to Bear Aaron. In my humble opinion, they're not game-breaking. None of them will give you a disgusting hand advantage, make your board non-interactable, or stop your opponent from executing his own combos. And to be the best, you kind of have to be in that realm. And because of that, I give the level 1 of the Abyssal Fleet a solid A- rank. Level 2 lineups in English Weiss are pretty sparse, and the Abyssal Fleet is no exception. There are only 2 cards at level 2 in this deck, and one of them is a backup. We'll start with this 2-1 2500 backup that, if you have 4 Abyssals on the field and pay 2 stock, you can use to anti-change. Super standard, but it also requires 4 characters, making it a touch worse than the standard anti-change. And the other card is this change target for the Midway Princess, her final form. It's a really interesting card. It has green card Encore, so any green card from your hand will Encore it, including events and climaxes. And if it's alone in the center stage at the start of your turn, it gets plus 4000 power till the end of the turn. So if your opponent wipes your field and you change into your Midway Princess, you have an 11,000 body with low cost. And we'll be getting into big bodies at level 2 in a bit, but for now let's close out the level 2 game with a simple B rating. Because let's face it, level 2 wasn't groundbreaking. So going into level 3, we have a 3-3-2 split. Starting with a standard early play healer, this Hydro Ogre in the Deep Sea is the bread and butter of the mid-game for Abyssals. I say that because it can be early played every game without fail with how much search and deck manipulation Abyssals has at its disposal. It's like the Kirito from SAO that gets -1 level if you have 2 or less climaxes in the yard, and gets plus 500 for each other traded character on your opponent's turn. But instead of draw 2 pitch 1, it heals. It's extremely standard stat-wise and mirrors several other early play healers with the same conditions and power boosts. But a ton of those cards see play for a reason, so don't mock the basics. It's big, it gives you back tempo, and it swings for 2 soul. And that's its job. What makes Hydro Ogre more annoying than other cards like it, though, is that the deck supporting it just makes it so efficient. You can hit 2-2 and then slap 2 of these down like clockwork, go back to 2-0, and sit pretty for 2 turns or even more. The consistency is what makes it kind of gross. Anyway, there are only 2 other cards in the deck, and those are your finishers. Your secondary finisher is this Hoppo in her final mode, which is a vanilla clock clicker that needs an additional stock to use its ability. But you can pay it on attack, so it's not a big deal. Well, not quite vanilla. She does get some power, so it's not as if she'll have a hard time with that clock kick ability. And finally, your main finisher is this Aircraft Defense Princess. She's this weird cross between Heroic Spirit Caster and Naotsugu from Log Horizon. When she comes in, top check 3 and add 1, and her power is conditional. She has 13k base, but she only gets that if she's in the middle center with no reversed characters or empty slots. Having those or not having her in the middle center decreases her power down to a minimum of 9,000. And her massive power helps with her climax combo. When you reverse her opponent, you can pay 3 and put the climax into your waiting room from the zone to restand her. So she's a decently priced restander that can come in for more precision damage since she'll have 1 less soul on the second swing. Now, obviously, it's easiest to get her restand ability to go off with all that power, but often enough your opponent will know to play around that and leave his middle center open. Even so, between woe classes and the climax power, you can still take on beefier opponents. She doesn't need to be in the middle center for the combo, only to get her power, so keep that in mind. So what about this level 3? All in all, the toolbox for finishing an early play is really quite standard. You can't restand more than once since you need to get rid of the climax to activate it, so it kind of caps out your finishing potential. But that said, there's nothing to complain about with this level 3, except maybe that it's not Last Shot Xenon. All said and done, I rank it at A-. Now let's wrap all this together. Judging by what we've said so far, you'd imagine the deck would have a disgusting advantage at level 0 that slowly peters out into mediocrity until it gets to its consistent finishers. Well, that's partially true. The mid-game of Abyssals won't give too many decks trouble, but while level 1 and level 2 are progressing, the Abyssal fleet relies on other parts of its toolbox to maintain its hand and board state. Let's look at the gameplay to see how this works. Starting off drawing your 5, Abyssals has 2 of the strongest openings whether you're on the play or on the draw. Hog Class is an indomitable wall that you can lay down, and Cock Class will get rid of literally any opening played by your opponent. During level 0, it's highly unlikely that you'll have any trouble with anything your opponent lays down, and no character should really be swinging more than once on their side. You can use this time to really sculpt your hand with Woe Class and your Tap 1 Brainstormer. Getting ready for level 1 will usually involve putting down some hoppos and taking out your opponent's back row, making it harder for them to climb over your front line. Hitting level 1 first kind of puts you at a disadvantage since Abyssals is way more of a reactionary deck, and it's unlikely that Hoppo will find value targets. If this does happen, just coast on your light cruiser ogres and aircraft carriers to thin your deck toward a super compressed refresh. Keep your hand packed and your stock where it is to shuffle as little flak as possible. Moving on to level 2, you should really be prepared to lay down at least 2 Hydra Ogres to heal yourself back to 2-0 with 7 climaxes in a thin deck. With Big Soul on the board and a compressed deck, you should easily push your opponent to level 3 first. While this is happening, make sure that you're continuing to move through your deck quickly with your aircraft carriers to avoid getting stuck with a thin stack and no climaxes. And when you do hit level 3, a single aircraft defense princess will generally be enough to finish the game for you. So, oddly enough, the deck plays a lot like Kantai. You can just keep using your amazing filtering to rush through your deck and compress yourself until you can finish with a level 3 consistent game. It's not that your cards are super threatening outside level 0, but your opponent won't be able to deal big damage to you or reduce your hand size barring getting lucky 7s. Playing this deck in tournaments, some of your better matches will be decks that rely on strong back rows and big front row busters and big damage, like Love Live or Sword Art. The things you might have more trouble with are the decks that have low-cost tech and consistent burns, instead of restanders and last shots, like Attack on Titan and to a lesser extent Persona. Watch out for things that can turn off damage from a single character at level 3 using things like Darkness Plan, Futaba, and Opposition by the Shield, since it can really shut down your level 3 game. Play smart around these cards. Don't leave big bodies in the middle center moving into level 3, so your opponent has no cards for your aircraft defense princess to reverse. Remember, you want targets to clock kick and restand, so don't try to outpower your opponent moving on to the endgame. Letting them slam level 0s into your Hydra Ogres, and then leaving an open field for you to swing Big Soul into, is a way to really handicap the deck's potential. So, play it smart, and if you need to, move one of those Hydra Ogres to the back. So now we've covered all aspects of the Abyssal Fleet deck. We've seen how it plays, what its components are, and how to operate it. All that's left is to rank it. Starting with consistency, this deck is without a doubt S rank. There's no deck in English Weiss that has more ability to control its hand, filter its deck, or compress itself. Woe class alone is almost enough to give this deck an S rank, but when you combine it with things like the Tap Self Brainstormer, a level 1 Akatsuki in the same deck, and other things, you get the kind of smooth gameplay that most decks can't hold a candle to. Moving to skill, I rate this deck a B+. Why? It's hard to mess up. Abyssal is the kind of deck that plays its own game. You play cards, they do good and powerful things, and if you find yourself in trouble, you have lots of outs. Most people who I've talked to that play this deck say it's also very forgiving to play mistakes. The hardest part about piloting the deck is maximizing your potential for compression and hand advantage, but basic principles of Weiss will take you a very long way with Abyssals. And now we move on to power. And when it comes to that, there's no question that Abyssal Fleet has some of the best cards in class. But how powerful is the deck? Aside from Hydra Ogre and Air Defense Princess, the characters on stage don't get very big. They also don't deal a lot of extra damage or have consistent ways to deal with more problem cards outside of level 0. The deck has a ton of advantage at level 0, and almost no deck will be able to match it punch for kick here. But after that, Abyssals mostly rides on compression and consistency. Hoppo and the Aircraft and Light Cruiser Ogres are good cards, but they're not incredibly scary. They don't stop your opponent's game plan in most cases. Now, while I wouldn't go as far to say that the deck's power isn't what makes it good, I would say that its power isn't its primary draw. At the end of the day, I rank it at A-. Now, as always, all rankings aside, my take on the deck is that it's fun to pick up and play, and not super fun to play against. It's not that Abyssals makes your deck stop working, it's that it's hard to corner, or pin down. You'll almost never get a real leg up on it. And frankly, because of the S-rank consistency, it's hard to kill. I classify it as a deck that could win you a lot of packs at your locals, but maybe not a lot of friends. But don't hate on Abyssals. You can't fault someone for picking it up, since it plays like such a well-oiled machine. So dump out the haterade, and fill up your cup with Sunken Kanmasu. Give Abyssals a shot today. That's all, players, so thanks for watching. Peace.